Vergil, you absolute fucking asshole. I couldn't tell you just how many times I've managed to beat this guy in Devil May Cry 3 on my PC, and yet on my first playthrough of Dante Must Die on the Switch, he still took me well over 2 hours to finally get the best of. That's in part because I still had an awkward time getting used to style switching and radial weapon swapping from just 30 hours of playing the game, but we'll get to that in a second. The point is that no matter how many hours I've poured into learning this guy, Vergil can still be one tough son of a bitch to take down, and that's part of what I love about him, and why he deserves his own video. Now initially I was just going to do Devil May Cry 3's iteration of Vergil and save 5 for another day, but honestly, I can't fucking do it. I need to talk about both of them. Oh, before I say any more, this video will obviously contain spoilers to Devil May Cry 1, 3, and 5 for all of you plebes who haven't played them yet. If you haven't, go play them. They're fantastic games. Why am I including a spoiler warning on games that are 20, 16, and 2 years old respectively? So nobody complains about it in the comments. But with that aside, welcome to the second episode of What Makes a Good Boss Fight, and in this one, I'm tackling Vergil from Devil May Cry 3 and 5. If you want to watch the template video as to what I'll be talking about here, here's something to click on, or you can click on the link in the description below. If not, that's fine. You should still be able to follow along. So without further ado, let's analyze Vergil's atmosphere, challenge, and satisfaction in Devil May Cry 3 and 5 to see what makes him not just a good boss fight, but a fucking legendary one.
We are the sons of Sparta. Within each of us flows his blood, but more importantly, his soul! And now, my soul is saying it wants to stop you!
Unfortunately, our souls are at odds, brother. I need more power.
Vergil's narrative appearance in Devil May Cry goes all the way back to the first game, albeit briefly. In it, we're told by Dante that he believes Mundus is responsible for taking the life of his brother and his mother. And throughout the course of the game, we fight a certain boss that comes to be known as Nello Angelo, which Dante remarks is a man with guts and honor. And after finally dispatching him in round 3, Dante discovers that this corrupted knight was none other than his brother. Dante obviously mourns his death, but aside from that, we're given very little information about who Vergil actually was and what relationship he had with Dante. Until the prequel Devil May Cry 3, that is. In this game, Vergil becomes a fully fleshed out character as Dante's rival, antithesis, and foil. He stands in direct contrast to the wild, fun-loving, and charismatic nature of Dante as a cold, calculated, and focused figure. He barely cracks a smile throughout the entire game and is presented as one hell of a force to be reckoned with. His appearance opposes Dante's color palette, hairstyle, and even the kind of sword he carries. Everything about Vergil's visual design and personality is made to be in conflict with the lovable, lighthearted, and adventurous Dante, which is fitting considering the fact that they fight a lot and seem to love it. And from the very start of the game, it's established that Vergil is quite literally above Dante in a multitude of ways as he stands atop the seemingly insurmountable Temeni Guru, and kills the game's first boss figure in a single attack to directly contrast Dante and the player's current inexperience. He's set as a goal for the player to not only reach, but ultimately surpass. And there are a total of 3 opportunities given to Dante and the player throughout the game. The first of which is where Vergil delivers an undisputed ass-whooping after taunting your lack of motivation and power, demonstrating he is leagues above Dante. And after showing off the fact that he's more than capable of dispatching Dante's foes faster than he can, growing in his own power and skill, the second match results in a undecided battle where the two seem to be evenly matched and are interrupted. But in this fight, not only is Vergil given a few new fancy moves, but also starts to take Dante a little more seriously by utilizing his Devil Trigger. With this, there's the implication that the player is starting to ascend to Vergil's level in terms of skill and strength, and are motivated to continue moving forward to see if they can get the sweet satisfaction of that victory. And finally, the rivalry concludes in a climactic showdown in the underworld. After Vergil and Dante work side by side to dispatch a wannabe good boss, they're left to face each other in the ultimate clash of their ideologies. Vergil, who strives for power and might, to be better than his demonic father as a way of coping with his lack of power that he believes resulted in his childhood trauma, and Dante, who stands in his way believing that Vergil's quest for power is destructive to himself and what surrounds him, and a vain attempt to be more like their dear departed dad. Vergil focuses exclusively on the past and future, callous towards anything in the present that would stand in his way to obtaining the power of Sparta he so desperately seeks, haunted by his past and only looking to a future with power. Dante, on the other hand, sees the brother in front of him in the present, with his soul screaming that he needs to stop his blind-sighted kin from completely abandoning his humanity for power. The entire Devil May Cry 3 experience is Dante's journey to come to accept his demonic heritage and responsibility his father left him. He grows to become more empathetic and actually care about what's going on around him, whereas Vergil has remained more or less the same in simply wanting power. And now, they come face to face. A choir mournfully sings as these two stare each other dead in the eye, as more instruments are added into the mix as they bicker. Everything builds up in anticipation for the climactic showdown, but all while that same choir continues to vocalize, the same way the despair that Dante and Vergil fear lingers in the backs of their mind during this bickering, until finally, they begin their last confrontation. The question this final battle in the underworld asks is whether Dante's growth is enough to surpass Vergil, and it's up to the player to find out if they have personally outgrown Vergil's seemingly insurmountable challenge.
And we're supposed to be twins.
Twins. Right.
As much as Vergil's atmosphere sets him up to be the epitome of a rival, a boss that players will look forward to fighting, it wouldn't mean much if he didn't hold up at all. So the question is, does he? You bet your sweet ass he does! There are a lot of things to get into about what makes this guy such an absurdly wonderful fight, the first of which is his damage. This guy can seriously destroy Dante's health bar, and in Dante Must Die mode, you absolutely feel it. Make one mistake against this asshole, and he will punish you in a way that'll just likely force a restart out of your sorry ass. But while a boss having an extremely bloated amount of attack power can ordinarily piss me off, it's hard to get too mad about Vergil. That's because there's always a very clear indication of when Vergil will attack, and the player is given a nice toolkit of how to deal with them, especially on the Switch port. Let's start with Vergil's telegraphs and attacks. Throughout Vergil's 3 fights in the game, he gains access to new moves for players to deal with, starting things out fairly basic with round 1 by exclusively using his Yamato-based attacks. In round 2, Vergil brings in Beowulf that unfortunately doesn't make it to round 3, but also introduces his Devil Trigger mechanic that we'll talk about in a second. And in round 3, Vergil gains access to Force Edge with some new combos and his Super Devil Trigger that we'll also get to in a second. The point is that every fight is ever slightly more challenging than the last. While some of his attacks are more instantaneous than others, throughout most of the fights there will be very clear telegraphs as to when Vergil will attack. He tends to use his Darkslayer style to teleport and reposition himself, and it's always safe to assume that if he's teleporting directly onto you, he's going on the offensive. Meanwhile, if he's teleporting far away, he's either going to use Judgment Cut, Stinger, or his AI is just freaking out about what the fuck they should do next. Without actually doing anything, the player usually has a reasonable way to assume when Vergil will make a move, and his aggressive AI really helps build it in. The other indication lies in when Vergil goes on the defensive. If you don't catch him fast enough at the end of some of his attack animations, or you see him stagger backwards after dealing enough damage to him, he will immediately block any attempt to hit him and follow it up with one of his attacks. Unless you're cheeky with Beowulf's charge attacks, that is, then you can fuck around with his AI. Fortunately, even if he does block your foolish attempt at damaging him, it doesn't flinch Dante enough to prevent reactions. You can still dodge, jump, or do whatever you want to get out of there. There isn't much time, but the window is just long enough to recognize what's going on and back the fuck out. Why am I saying this? This isn't a guide. The reason is that I'm providing context as to what typically happens in a fight against Vergil and what makes him such a great challenge. At the end of most of Vergil's attacks, there is a small window for Dante to get his own hits in. If he manages to bitch slap Vergil fast enough, it'll give the player the opportunity to perform their own combo until Vergil does his "Don't Touch Me" animation, resetting both of their positions and making the player deal with Vergil's next onslaught before they find another opening. It's a constant back and forth of Vergil and Dante throwing out their attacks, countering each other, narrowly avoiding getting hit, and dancing around each other as true equals. Typically, fights will follow a pattern of Vergil attacking, the player taking steps to avoid damage, and counterattacking until Vergil indicates that he's had enough of their bullshit. It's a true test of a player's skill in avoiding damage, being stylish, and using every tool at their disposal to best their opponent. The repetition would ordinarily make fights against Vergil short-lived, mundane, and exploitable, but round 2 and beyond against Vergil introduces the one thing that elevates this fight above and beyond. And that is the element of chaos in the form of his Devil Trigger, and his summoned swords on Dante Must Die mode. At random intervals throughout the fight, Vergil will activate his Devil Trigger. While in this mode, Vergil's attack power is significantly increased, he takes less damage, and cannot be flinched. In less fun fights across other games, this would indicate stop attacking, stay on the defensive. But Vergil isn't a dumb shit fight. Instead, players are given incentive to be smart and cautious about their attacks, but remain on the offensive. The reason for this is that Vergil will be kicked out of his Devil Trigger faster if players deal enough damage to him. If they simply let him have his way with all of his attacks and don't try and punish him, he'll remain in the form for a longer amount of time, thereby regenerating a lot more health and holding the advantage significantly longer. By using it at random, Vergil creates this element of chaos I just spoke of. The dynamic of the fight can shift on a whim, going from even trades to a desperate attempt to kick Vergil out of Devil Trigger while also not getting too greedy, lest you be punished for your foolishness. Of course, in lower difficulties, this is all there is to Vergil, and that's still a lot to take in. But Dante Must Die mode introduces a bit of a broken mechanic in the form of the summoned swords. Capcom's wonderful idea was to just make him invincible while he goes into an animation of summoning a ring of swords around him that'll damage and flinch Dante if you're caught by them. After a set period of time, he'll deploy them in a fixed animation to launch them. They're kind of bullshit in this game, honestly. Granted, I don't hate them, but unfortunately in 3 you're left with just 2 options. Use Quicksilver to destroy them before they become a problem, or just dodge and run for dear life until he gets rid of them. Like his Devil Trigger, Vergil will use this whenever he wants, once he reaches 75% health, and can overlap with basically anything. He can Devil Trigger and use it before or during his Super Devil Trigger, and there was even a time where he used it immediately before his Super Devil Trigger ended, effectively eliminating the punishment window that he ordinarily has after being phased out of it. Speaking of Super Devil Trigger, at 25% health remaining, Vergil will surround himself in this giant purple anti-sexual assault orb and will proceed to go absolutely bonkers on Dante. He will teleport and combo Dante non-stop, or start spamming his Helmbreaker attack in quick succession. While intimidating at first, it's all easily avoidable, or you can just block it if you're ballsy. At the end of this onslaught, he'll be vulnerable, allowing players to wail on him. Of course, he can mix this up with his summoned swords as previously mentioned, and can go into it at any time once he reaches that health threshold. Or he can use his Judgment Cut end, wherein he'll use a shit ton of Judgment Cuts around the arena like a child throwing a tantrum with a kitchen knife, which will either spawn in random directions or follow Dante. Again, simple to dodge, and can be blocked if you're ballsy, and it has an obvious punishment window. In spite of how easily most of Vergil's attacks can be avoided and countered, what really makes this challenging is being able to keep up all the momentum for it long enough. Vergil has quite a lot of health on Dante Must Die, and will regenerate it for every Devil Trigger he uses, including his supers. With all of that back and forth, teleporting around, and summoned swords bullshit, it's almost inevitable that Vergil will snag some kind of opening or catch a player off guard, at least the ones that aren't gods at the game like Don Guri. And that results in some serious punishment against the player. So in spite of how many times Dante can catch an opening, all Vergil would need is just 1 or 2 to either balance things out or turn the tide in his favor. Vergil round 3 on Dante Must Die mode especially is a fantastic fight that is sure to put any Devil Hunter to the test. He can look like a cakewalk and can be pretty exploitable once you learn him, but the trick is to keep up that momentum long enough to actually defeat him, which is typically easier said than done. The one downside to Vergil as a boss, however, is he doesn't provide too many opportunities for stylish combos on him, given how he can't be launched, airborne, and juggled. A lot of weapons do negligent damage on him, and the game doesn't really emphasize styling on him to begin with. Which is fair considering the fact that most of Devil May Cry 3's aerial combat was locked to a single style that couldn't be switched to on the fly. But don't let that take away from the fact that nearly everything else about Vergil is almost perfect, especially with the element of chaos involving his random devil trigger and summoned sword uses, in spite of the limited way to deal with the latter.
Am I being defeated?
What's wrong? Is that all you got? Come on, get up! You can do better than that.
After what will likely be a battle full of clutches, the player is rewarded with their well-earned victory against Vergil after getting their asses kicked in Mission 7, being interrupted in 13, and getting through this final confrontation. And thus we get to the satisfaction of victory against Vergil. In terms of mechanical satisfaction, it's no doubt that a player's first victory against Vergil, especially on Dante Must Die mode, will be satisfying to all fucking hell. He can be one serious asshole to take down. Between his insane damage, fast moves, regenerating health, and instances where you're forced to be on the defensive, Vergil is a fight that requires knowledge, patience, and style. While it doesn't provide much in the form of combos, it does test a player's ability to essentially avoid being hit and find openings as if they were fighting themselves. His fight constantly gives the feel that one is truly fighting their equal. He will attack, defend, react, and use every little trick up his sleeve to ensure victory, a tactic that the player must match and exceed Vergil's motivation in order to pull through with a victory. And upon doing so, they are given the satisfaction of finally surpassing the same figure that stood high above them on Temen Nigru, overcoming the game's ultimate challenge and growing as a devil hunter through it all. That is the mechanical satisfaction of defeating Vergil, and I'm certain most people out there have done it multiple times to be better each run. The narrative satisfaction of defeating Vergil, on the other hand, is a little bittersweet, serving as a farewell from Vergil, both to Dante and the player. Dante, so full of grief on the belief that his brother is now trapped and will likely die in hell so he can never see him again, manages to shed a tear, a feat he presumed to be impossible because of his demonic heritage. In spite of the fact that Vergil and Dante seemed adamant at killing each other, and Dante continuing to stand in his way, there were still tears to be shed, if nothing else than because Vergil was his brother and Dante loved him in spite of their differences, or maybe because of them. Vergil's time was pretty short-lived, limited to only this game for the time, but certainly left an impact. He stood above players and Dante as something to aspire to reach, kicked them down and demanded they get better, and inevitably fulfilled his role as both a rival for Dante and the player in making both of them better. Dante's mourning for the loss of Vergil is likely to be very similar to how a player might feel to Vergil's defeat. While initially satisfying as hell to taunt him and claim victory, the end result of Vergil being gone seemingly indefinitely only creates an empty void that is difficult to fill. As a rival figure done so perfectly, it's hard to imagine Dante without Vergil, and similarly it's hard to imagine playing Devil May Cry without somebody like Vergil to make you rise to the challenge. Satisfying to defeat, but bittersweet to say goodbye. And unfortunately, that same feeling would be the norm for the foreseeable future. Until Devil May Cry 5, that is!
Bury the light deep within.
Suffering defeat after defeat, that man's body was reaching its limit, breaking down.
Can we just appreciate the fact that Capcom basically made an entire game dedicated to bringing Vergil back from the dead? I mean, there's obviously way more character development in it for Nero and Dante, but this just speaks leagues about how much of a beloved character he became. After almost 15 years of being missing in action, Capcom was like, fuck it, how do we bring him back? But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. With the fact that Devil May Cry 5 has both Nero and Dante's grudges to settle with Vergil, I'd be here all day trying to set up his atmosphere, so I'll try my best here focusing exclusively on Dante and Vergil's events and relationships. After the events of the first Devil May Cry, Vergil becomes a husk of his former self, though still alive. At this point, he's decrepit, miserable, and is essentially running on borrowed time. In a desperate attempt to acquire more power and settle his score with Dante once and for all, old habits die hard, I guess, Vergil severs his demonic and human halves so that his demonic power can grow and thrive independently without his presumed hindrance of humanity. Thus is born the Demon King Urizen and the playable character V. Although initially he comes across as an undefeatable monstrosity, Dante inevitably embraces his demonic heritage by merging with his human and demonic halves to acquire his Sin Devil trigger. With his newfound power, he defeats Urizen twice, who almost childishly whines about why Dante is stronger than him during their fight. Dante manages to almost effortlessly thwart Vergil's vain attempt to acquire more power that must be earned and cannot simply be acquired. What this highlights is that the rejection of humanity, Vergil's path to power, and the embracing of one's demonic darker half, Dante's ascent to greater limits, are not one and the same. Both are radically different approaches to power that lead to different ends. V, meanwhile, explains a few things about their relationship that'll be important in a second, but I'm trying to keep this train on track. The crumbling human half of Vergil reunites with the demonic monstrosity that is Urizen, commenting on how they both have lost each other, but the one thing that has kept them connected is that singular desire for power. As Urizen continues to whine about wanting more power, they are finally reunited into Vergil, the Alpha and the Omega, born anew as a menacing foe once again. Dante's rival, his foil, and his reason for living and fighting stands in front of him once again, stronger than ever. His mere presence so mind-blowing that Dante seems to even lose his cool and immediately go in for a battle, which Vergil basically reminds him that he's not motivated enough. But the two are determined to settle the score atop the Qliphoth. If they can ever settle their score, that is. That's because V's explanation on why they must fight provides even further context on the already established rivalry between the two, and how Dante remarks that the only memory he has of them since they were kids is fighting. It implies that even though the two are seemingly at each other's throats at all times trying to kill each other, the fact that they are capable of showing mercy or mourning loss for the other implies that they simply must fight because it is in their nature, and it will never be something they can settle or actually kill each other over. The two of them practically see nothing else to do with each other, not in a pessimistic sense, but simply because they are so oppositional in what they believe that they are destined to fight. The only thing that could get in the way is some kind of third party splitting them up temporarily before they resume their usual shenanigans. Make no mistake, Dante has plenty of reason to fight and stop Vergil for the kind of destruction his pursuit of power causes in the events of both games, but beyond all of that, as Lady points out, there seems to be some sort of twisted pleasure that the both of them enjoy from their brotherly fighting. Vergil even reminisces and contemplates if their positions were switched, a singular position of circumstance. If they would simply swap places all these years down the line, would they be living each other's lives? This, coupled with V's statement of how they must fight, seems to imply that the two are so vastly different, yet interwoven and similar, that the only thing they can ever know is to try and fight and best each other. This dichotomy of being so similar yet so different is what drives the two for another showdown atop the Qliphoth. All of this set up for one final showdown against Vergil, Dante's reason for fighting, and the reason this whole fucking game exists. The question is, does it pay off? This is where we get to why I made this video, Devil May Cry 5's Vergil, and how it compares to 3. Oddly enough, I don't see many people talking about this comparison, or maybe I'm just fucking blind, I don't know. Anyway, most of Vergil's core principles from 3 are carried over to 5 with a few twists. While he still does block and avoid most of Dante's attacks when he's not in some kind of ending animation, he usually doesn't follow it up immediately with some sort of attack. This makes aggressive play a lot safer in some ways, but also kind of pointless, especially if you're a fucking moron like me and try to do something badass only to end up whiffing someone that's in front of you. But moving on. A majority of Vergil's telegraphs come in his teleportations. When he's not standing there launching summoned swords at you one at a time like a real Vergil never would, he'll reposition himself in a way that gives a clear indication of what he'll do. If he's far away, he'll judgment cut. If he's a fixed distance, it'll be a rapid slash. If he's close up, he's going in for a quick combo. This gives a very clear indication of both when he'll attack and what kind of attack he'll be doing, which makes some of the insane damage he can pump out all the more fair. While all of these are easy to deal with either by just avoiding them or using Royal Guard, which is significantly less punishing in this game, Judgment Cut is usually the one that results in the most trouble, and that's because Capcom decided to give him super armor during the animation. So unlike in 3 where it was "Punish me Dante Senpai," in 5 it can be a giant "fuck you, I'm invincible." And in the later half of the fight, he uses it a lot. It's kind of ironic how Rapid Slash and Judgment Cut switch places between games. In 3, Rapid Slash was the one that gave you the least room for punishment due to its iframes at the start and the fact that you could only sneak in one attack. But in 5, not only is it easy to avoid, but you can even parry it if you're good enough and just knock his ass out of the animation. Aside from his standard attacks and movement, Vergil's summoned swords make a return on all difficulty levels. Except this time, Capcom made them much easier to deal with. Maybe a little too easy. In 3, you were restricted to running for dear life or using Quicksilver to destroy them before he finished his summoning animation. In 5, however, you can destroy them with firearms, melee attacks, fucking Balrog's jump, Royal Guard them with ease, it doesn't matter. But I do enjoy how Capcom decided to give players a plethora of options for dealing with his summoned swords just like the rest of his attacks. They will stun you if you get hit by too many of them, so don't. While much of the fundamentals to Vergil's kit and his fight remain the same, avoiding his attacks and weaving in your own, there are a few changes in Devil May Cry 5 that really elevates this fight in some ways and is just different in others. The first is the fact that Vergil can actually be fucking juggled. In the third game, Vergil only went airborne when he was about to slam dunk Force Edge into Dante's thick skull. A lot of weapons and attacks were therefore quite useless against him, and most people would run just Rebellion, Nevon, and Beowulf while maybe using the other weapons to fuck around with him. And even with style switching, the main styles used would be Trickster, Royal Guard if you're ballsy, and Quicksilver for some cheese and ease. Swordmaster could be used for some niche damage and combos, and Gunslinger was... Why are you using Gunslinger against Vergil in Devil May Cry 3? But with some new and improved weapons and Vergil's capacity to be juggled, there is a reason to use every single weapon on Vergil. Whether it's evading or blocking his attacks, extending combos, using firearms to peel away at summoned swords to make him look like a dumb shit that actually gets shot, it doesn't matter. There is so much more freedom as to what people can do against Vergil when it comes to the offensive compared to 3. You won't see much from me since I'm pretty much an average Devil May Cry player, but look up some no-damage fights against Vergil and you'll see what I mean. Aside from that, his Devil Trigger works a bit differently. Whereas in 3 he would use it whenever he felt like it and it would be the player's job to knock his ass out of it before he starts to regenerate too much, 5 works a little bit more like typical boss phases. At around 66% health, Vergil will enter his Sin Devil Trigger and regain a little bit of health immediately, and start attacking almost non-stop before finishing it off with an attack that makes him look like he's trying to audition for the role of Starscream. Aside from knocking his sorry ass out of the sky with this last attack by ass blasting him or royal releasing this motherfucker so hard you break his spirit, there isn't a way to knock him out of this early. And it's basically just a time where Vergil gets to go hard without being punished all that much for it. Unless of course you're using Royal Guard. Then you can make his life a living hell. After this little intermission, Vergil's attacks will be changed ever so slightly. Judgment Cut will now be done in combos of 4, with him being unflinchable throughout the entire wind-up animation, and he'll also use it at the end of his Rapid Slash combos. He'll occasionally try to do his Katana Slam attack with an obvious wind-up, and he might try and Judgment Nut End all over your face. Overall, he's a bit more aggressive than he was in the first phase, but aside from the smaller punch windows due to his 4-combo Judgment Cuts, there isn't much else that changes. At around 33% left, he'll introduce his final mechanic, the Doppelganger. This is when shit hits the fan and gets chaotic. And I mean chaotic in a different way compared to the element of chaos that I spoke about in 3. The Doppelganger will essentially act like a second Vergil that unleashes attacks that either mimic whatever Vergil is doing or does whatever the hell it wants. Having to juggle two of these assholes can make things pretty dicey, but fortunately the doppelganger can be killed with a few love taps, and Vergil doesn't stay in his devil trigger indefinitely. Regardless, this last phase of Vergil can get absolutely fucking nuts, and it's usually where I fail the most. Part of the reason is that Vergil's defense is upped. Rather than letting you wail on him once you catch him off guard, he will sometimes put his arms up and prevent all damage, and immediately counterattack unless you manage to break his guard. This can be difficult in the heat of the moment. Between him saying "fuck you, mom said it's my turn to be invincible," his judgment cuts extending combos without punish windows, and the usage of his doppelganger, Vergil at his low health point is where he is at his toughest, which is ironically where players might want to rush and finish him off. He will punish greed and not being smart, so remaining calm is the best way to go about it. The biggest difference I'd like to highlight is the lack of chaos compared to 3. Like I said before, in 3 he would use his devil trigger or super devil trigger whenever he damn well pleased, and Dante Must Die mode would add further chaos with his bullshit summoned swords. At the flip of a switch, the fight's dynamic would change. With 5, however, there is much more of a sequence of events that follow. While the player's reaction to it will vary, it's predictable when he'll use his devil trigger and then his doppelganger plus devil trigger. There's even dialogue to signal when it'll likely occur. Although there were a few times where I took too long to kill him and he ended up using his devil trigger again before unleashing a new plethora of attacks, it's a lot less randomized and dynamic than it was in 3. I'm not saying this like it's a bad thing though, it's just different. It creates a unique momentum and flow that honestly I really love. Vergil in Devil May Cry 5 carries the same core principle over from the 3rd game when it comes to the fight's dynamic, but between style switching being a little more integrated, weapons being a little more useful and impactful, the ability to launch Vergil airborne, and a new way to deal with his devil trigger, the fight does carry its own tune, albeit a bit similar to 3. If I had to pick which one I preferred, I would say 3 based on the element of chaos alone, but make no mistake, the margin is microscopically small. Capcom did a spectacular job bringing this guy back after almost 15 years. After a stylishly climactic battle full of teleports, royal guards, fuck yous, gnomes, summoned swords, and woohoos, Vergil inevitably goes down. And finally, that brings me to the satisfaction and conclusion of it all. Let's start with the narrative because there isn't as much to talk about since I'm focusing exclusively on Dante here. Sorry to the Nero fans out there. In terms of narrative satisfaction, it is refreshing to see that at the end of all of this, the two can at least stand to be in each other's presence without trying to kill each other. They still bicker and are so fundamentally different they'll likely never see eye to eye, but players are given the satisfaction of seeing the two simply be brothers that can sort of agree to disagree. It says a lot about their relationship with the fact that they're both willing to be stuck in hell with each other for an indefinite period of time, on the unspoken condition that they simply spar to pass the time. It's like these two are just tsunderes unable to say that they love each other, and instead try to fight to prove who loves the other more. I don't know, man. The point is, narratively, it's satisfying to not only beat Vergil, but also not see it as a farewell. Although he's technically gone with Dante, it's in a much more cathartic way. The two of them are voluntarily trapped in hell, but at least they have each other for company. It's kind of sweet, actually. Now, the mechanical satisfaction of beating Vergil in 5 is just about as well deserved as it was in 3. While the games are a bit different in their own ways, even if you are playing the Switch port of 3, Vergil is still an obstacle that might seem insurmountable at first glance, but proper handling of both Dante's kit and knowledge of Vergil's will lead to this fight becoming one of those special things that words simply cannot describe. As you might have guessed with me taking all this time to try to do it. Anyway, Vergil's fight is fucking legendary among video games. I would place few fights on par with him, much less above him. Whether we're talking about his 2005 fight that has aged surprisingly well, or his menacing return almost 15 years later, both fights carry their own challenges and mechanics that would push any devil hunter to their limits. He will make you learn his openings and attacks, he will punish you for your foolish attempts at rushing in blindly, and he will hone your skills and reflexes with his offensive streaks while desperately looking for his openings. Vergil was obviously never the first rival character in video games, but it's safe to say that he raised the bar above and beyond what one would ordinarily think. Not only does he challenge and defeat Dante when he's found to be unworthy, but he does the same to the player. And in the same way he forces any rookie devil hunter to get better or fall like scum trying, he stood on a throne for just how well designed he was. Whether we're talking about his visuals, personality, gameplay mechanics, or what he stood for, Vergil stood as a test for not only Devil May Cry fans, but to any video game out there that thought of using the rival dynamic. Vergil rhetorically asks, "Where is your motivation?" while simultaneously not even realizing that he is motivation. And I don't mean that in the meme sense. He stands as a symbol for striving to be better. He is introduced to be better, proven to be better, and he challenges you to just try and keep up. A good rival like Vergil stands as the epitome of growth and development, and he has more than stood the test of time. In spite of the fact that this video is like 5 times longer than the Fatalis one, it was fucking worth it. Vergil is an icon among gaming figures and rivals, and deserves all of the praise he gets. I hope you enjoyed the video, I'll see you next time, and stay motivated.